You are listening to
PackersTalk.com. This Green Bay Packers podcast is brought to you by Mayfield Sports Marketing, our official sports marketing agent for player appearances. To book a Packers player for your next event, go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances. Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Card.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.
Amanda, come in.
10-4.
Have you infiltrated the security system yet?
Locked and loaded, ready to lower myself into the enemy war room.
I'm lowering you down now.
I have access. The Packers are in for a tough one this week. I need the password to proceed.
The password is read option.
I hate that password.
Me too. You know which wires to cut.
Always go for the green and gold. Here we go. I'm Amanda Geffre.
And I'm Chris Callaway, and you're going with us behind enemy lines. Welcome to another week of Packers football and Behind Enemy Lines, a podcast hosted through PackersTalk.com. You can find us on iTunes at PackersTalk.com, as well as on Twitter at EnemyLinesGB. I'm one of the hosts, Chris Callaway, on Twitter at CCallaway33, and I'm joined, as always, by my dear friend and fellow owner, Amanda, who you can find on Twitter at Amanda R. Geffre. This Sunday, the Packers will host division rival, the Detroit Lions, as they meet for the first time this season. The Pack hopes to secure a win after two straight losses, including last weekend's debacle down in Charlotte. I think that's the second week in a row I've used the word debacle, but what are you feeling after last weekend's game?
It hurts, man. We haven't had a back-to-back loss in a long time.
2010, I think someone said?
Oh, gosh.
Or at least an Aaron Rodgers-led back-to-back loss.
Right, let's clarify.
Right.
Oh, man, I don't know. It was painful. Everything about that game was painful. Like, they were playing so crappy. Like, it was one of those games where, like, you want them to win, but they don't deserve to win.
Right.
That's how I felt.
And I guess one of the more painful things to me was the circumstances under which I had to watch the game. I was at a family gathering on Sunday, and there was my sister-in-law side of the family there, which are people that I'm not very familiar with. And I think it was like her aunt and her grandma and some other person. So it was like 70, 75-year-old women that I'm sitting on the couch, and they're just yelling at the TV, and most of it is nonsense. You know, we're on offense, and they're yelling, why isn't Clay Matthews out there? And they wanted to fire the secondary at one point, and I give them credit for knowing what a secondary is, but that just kind of added to my, I don't know, my lack of enthusiasm.
It was annoying.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I feel you, because I was getting no sympathy from Aaron. And he's like, okay, try having your quarterback go out right away in the season. Lose every game. And I was like, all right, Cowboys don't count as a real team.
And we were right there 2 years ago, and we still made the playoffs.
Yeah.
You use that argument, yeah?
He had no sympathy.
Okay.
So
well,
I was frustrated by myself, texting you.
Here's another thing. I deal with a lot of Vikings fans who now think that their stuff don't stink because they're 6-2.
God's greatest gift.
Right. They've beaten some terrible teams, including the Detroit Lions, who the Packers will face this weekend. The Bears, they beat the Rams, which is a pretty good win, and I think their other win was against, I don't remember, somebody bad like the Chiefs. It's hardly an incredibly impressive stretch of football. Yeah, it's good anytime you can win 4 straight games, but not to overlook this weekend, but I'm looking forward to hopefully the Packers shutting them up on the road at TCF on the 22nd.
Right? Oh, yeah. Now, luckily, there's not a lot of Vikings fans around here.
Right.
They're mostly Bears fans, so they're still crying over the Cubs' loss. Yeah, like I haven't really heard anybody say anything to me, which is great, except for, like, I don't really have anybody to console me either because I'm like, Packers have lost 2 games in a row. What? They're still 6-2? Nobody cares.
Right. Like, they're still in pretty good position. It's still the midway point of the season.
It's true.
Calm down a bit. But getting back to the game against Carolina this past weekend, there was the incident on the sideline where things got a little chippy. Clinton-Dix.
Yeah.
BJ Raji, Julius Peppers. Tempers flaring a little bit. Did that concern you really at all?
I don't. It's one of those things where you like to think that your team can handle it well, but they're very passionate about the game, and you're seeing them very wound up. They know that they need to do better. I guess it's good to see that they have that passion, but at the same time, it's like, hey, use that energy and do something on the field. I don't know.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think those types of interactions can happen all the time. I think you probably see them almost every day at practice. I mean, it probably happens like in the locker room, but just the fact that it happened and they caught it on camera and they were able to, talk about it right away. It's a little unfortunate, but I think, Mike McCarthy kind of summed it best and kind of playing it off. He's like, good, I'm glad they showed some frustration and some fire in the way things were going because it kind of sucked. So I like the way that McCarthy handled it. And, I'm not overly worried about it carrying over any farther than it did.
Right. Yeah, I'm not really – I don't think it'll drag out. It's not going to be the next biggest drama that we're talking about. If that's the worst kind of attention the Packers get, thank you. I'll take it any day. Yeah.
The Packers are pretty lucky in that regard. And,
yes,
another thing people like to point to last weekend was the whole tablet throwing incident from Aaron Rodgers. But he had Randall Cobb wide open on the right side of the field. It was probably an illegal pick, illegal rub play, whatever. But if he could have somehow seen it out of the corner of his eye, got him over there, it's a whole different ball game. And, he's just frustrated. He's a human being, and he holds himself to a higher standard. So even that, I'm not overly worried about his, little outburst. It's hardly an outburst.
No, it's just, I think he knew that was on him.
Sure.
The play was there, and I don't know. It was one of those things where we were watching the game and it's sucking, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, we're going to give you a glimmer of hope. And I think Aaron throwing the tablet was just basically how we all felt. Like, son of a cinnamon stick. But either way, I mean, moving forward, what are you most concerned about, Chris? We've seen two really rough games. What are you threatened by in the rest of the season? I mean, we have relatively easy games, but not ones that we should write off by any means.
No, and I mean, saying what I did about Minnesota, that's going to be a tough game going up there. Looking earlier in the season, that was one I maybe would have penciled in as a loss, but I guess I'm most concerned about the offensive line, and I don't think I would have said that early in the season, but Rodgers is on the run, out of the pocket a lot, which isn't the worst thing because he's exceptionally good when he's flushed out of the pocket, but he's not good when he's got three guys in his face. You know what I mean? Like, they need to be able to withstand the pass rush a little bit more. And I know that they said that, I know that they played two of the best defenses in the league in the Broncos and the Panthers, but that's also the company that they want to keep. They want to be compared against those top teams in the league. They don't want to be compared against the Lions, who they're playing this week. They want to be able to be more competitive with those upper echelon teams. So I think, Corey Linsley needs to step up his play a little bit more. And that left side of the offensive line, a little leaky. And, if they're not careful, Rodgers does have a few injuries in his history, and that would be bad.
Right. Well, and, just going off of that, there was no way that Rodgers could use the running game to relieve some of that pressure off of him. Mm-hmm. Like, the running game, there was, 2-3 good runs that happened the whole entire – there was nothing going there.
Right, and McCarthy making the switch, so to speak, this week that James Starks is going to be the number one back. And Eddie Lacy, he says he's not out of shape. He says he hasn't gained weight. He just doesn't know what the problem is, and I think that's accurate. I don't really know what the issue is with Eddie Lacy, and I don't know. I think you're still going to see enough of him, but hopefully this is the type of game where, hopefully they can get back on track.
Right, yeah. I don't know either what it is. I definitely think that James Starks has earned it, though, because he has helped them get out of a few difficult situations. Either way, it wasn't enough to really make the offense versatile last week.
Yeah, versatile is a very good word. I mean, it was very stagnant. I mean, there's not a whole lot going across the middle. You know, they're not using Randall Cobb effectively enough. I think they can find a way to get Richard Rodgers incorporated over the middle of the field a little bit more. But I think missing Jordy Nelson hurts more like now than we've ever seen before. Yeah. And, you know, I think Devontae Adams coming back certainly helps, but James Jones has been, you know, quiet here for a couple of weeks. So they just need to kind of get back to a point where they're taking some shots downfield. They're using the whole width of the field to their advantage. And I hope that's one of the things that they really spend some time doing on the practice field this week.
Yeah, no, I hope you're right. I just think that our offense stalling has impacted the whole game. Like, our defense hasn't been, like, amazing by any means. But I think that we can't expect them to be able to play a majority of the game when the offense is 3 and out.
Right.
I was so frustrated and disappointed in that in the first half of the game last week. I was like, our defense can't be out there the whole time. They're going to get tired. And that's when the end of the game plays, you know, you mess those up. You can't play defense as strong at the end of the fourth quarter. So, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of people who are super concerned about the defense. Yeah, there's a few things to tweak there, but I just would rather see that we get more things going on offense because I think that'll ultimately relieve some of that pressure off of the defense as well.
Well, hopefully the good news is that it's about a best-case situation you can ask for this weekend. Yes. It's a game at home. The weather's not going to be too bad. And the 1-7 Detroit Lions are coming to town. I mean, if you needed a breather, this is about as well as you can draw it up.
Oh, yes. It's wonderful. And we don't have to worry about Dirty Sue playing.
That's true. I kind of miss him.
I don't. He's a jerk.
Fair enough. I still think that hopefully the Packers will be able to take care of the business.
I think so too. I hope that they are able to too. Maybe we should talk to the expert from the other side.
I think we should.
Now we'd like to welcome our guest, Kyle Meinke, who joined us last year to talk about the Lions. Kyle is a Detroit Lions beat writer for MLive Media Group. You can find his work on Twitter by following him at @KMeinke. Welcome to the show, Kyle. Thanks for joining us again.
Hey, Amanda. Good to be here.
So, I think we're quick to forget that the Lions were a playoff team last year. How did they go from probably should have beat the Cowboys to kind of this mess that they're in right now?
I mean, it's a great question because it has been such a large and dramatic fall for the team. But, for me, it starts with the defense first and foremost because Ndamukong Suh was this team's best player last year. And I think the Lions underestimated the prospects they had of re-signing him. And in the end, of course, they lost him to Miami, and their defense took a hit. They thought once they traded for Haloti Ngata, the defense was going to be okay, but obviously it hasn't been. It's taken a huge step back. The defensive line is not nearly as good without Suh. That's compounded by the loss of DeAndre Levy to a hip injury, and he is done for the year, so he won't play this week or any other week for the rest of the year. And that has exacerbated the issues on offense. And the offense was bad last year, but because of the great defense, it was kind of covered up. But this year, when you don't have that great defense to rely on, the offense has basically blown up. And, there's been so many issues on that side of the ball. The Lions are last in rushing the football. Stafford is 20th in quarterback rating. He's been sacked, I believe, the third or fourth most times in the league. There really is nothing you can say the Lions do well at this point offensively. And there's a couple of bright spots. Eric Ebron's been okay. Kelvin Johnson's been okay. But there's no phase of the offense that the opposition goes into a game saying, well, we have to be really scared about what the Lions can do here. The offense is really bad. It wasn't very good last year, but now that the Lions no longer rank second in the league in defense, I think that's been kind of the root of their issues.
Well, we'll get to some of those more specific things coming up, but big picture-wise, there's been a lot of turmoil within the organization. People getting fired from all the way from the top on down, and it seems like everybody's on the hot seat, and probably rightfully so. So, big picture-wise, what's your take on how things are and where things are going with this organization?
Yeah, you're 1-7, and this is the second time the Lions have collapsed under the now previous regime with Martin Mayhew and Tom Luan. And so the writing was always on the wall. Martha Firestone Ford, the owner of the Lions, pulled the trigger on their firings quicker than I think most anticipated, but it was something we all did kind of anticipate at some point happening, just because the organization has basically disintegrated and there needs to be a fresh start. It's clear that not much is working at this point. And so, the process already started. The Lions have an interim general manager in Sheldon White. I just don't know how much he can do, obviously, going forward, because the trading deadline has already passed. By the time you get to free agency, the draft, and things like that, where you can actually improve the club, the Lions will already have a full-time replacement in place. So, I don't know. At this point, obviously, everyone's on the hot seat. And the big question, I know that's out there nationally, is the fate of Jim Caldwell. It's not unheard of for an organization to leave a head coach in place while changing general managers, but it is, it's rare. The Fords do like Jim Caldwell a lot, but I just don't know how they can keep Caldwell in place, given just how disastrous this season has been. I think barring something miraculous in the second half of the season, Jim Caldwell is probably out of a job, and most of the staff and much of the front office as well. I really do expect at some point to see a total cleaning of the house from the Lions.
Well, let's start with the offense and talk a little bit more about the specific gameplay. Like you said, Matthew Stafford certainly has not looked good this season. Do you chalk that up to the offensive line problems, or is there an ongoing issue with him himself?
Well, it's both. It's interesting. I don't know if there's another player I've seen, at least in Detroit, that draws more varying opinions than Matthew Stafford. There are people who think he can still be a franchise quarterback and a great quarterback and someone who can bring a team to a Super Bowl. And there are people who think he should be out immediately and that he is no good. And then there's obviously lots of opinions in between. But the issue is complicated. I tend to believe that Stafford is still a very talented quarterback and someone you can win with. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not an Aaron Rodgers who you throw him out there and he's going to make the guys around him better instantly. I just think Stafford is really gifted physically, and you put the right pieces around him and he can do some things. But, with the offensive line that he has in front of him, he's not having a chance, an opportunity to do those kinds of things. And the duress that he is under is absolutely incredible. Through 5 or 6 weeks, he had faced more pressure than any quarterback in the league. I believe now Russell Wilson's ahead of him, but he's facing lots of pressure. And it's amazing to me that it's not just offensive linemen getting beat on their blocks or whatever. It's totally unblocked pass rushers. There are fundamental issues with communication and with the scheme that are allowing pass rushers to go completely unblocked. In the Denver game, I remember Von Miller came off totally unblocked coming out of a timeout. How do you not mark Von Miller, And so there's some issues with the scheme and with communication. I think that's a big reason why Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, was fired a couple of weeks ago, along with the offensive line coach and the assistant offensive line coach, because it's not just a talent matter, I think, on the offensive line. It's communication and all these things. And so Stafford has basically no chance sometimes when it comes to the pressure that he's facing. And then that puts you in second and third and long situations. And the Lions at this point just aren't good enough to convert those situations consistently. And I think that's a big reason why you see Stafford's numbers where they are and the Lions' overall offensive numbers where they are.
Well, I guess one kind of positive, if you want to spin it that way, is that now Stafford has another week working with new offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter. They're coming off of a bye. So, what kind of changes in the offense do you think they might see with a little bit more time to work together?
First of all, congrats on saying Jim Bob Cooter with a straight face. That's well done.
I've been practicing, let me tell you.
Normally you have to go through this a few times like we have before you can actually do it. I actually remember the first time that we had talked to former general manager Martin Mayhew about hiring Jim Bob Cooter as Stafford's quarterback coach last year. reporter was sitting right next to me and asked about Jim Bob Cooter and just burst out laughing right in his face right after he said the name. Pretty funny moment. But aside from the name, Jim Bob he's a guy the Lions have liked a lot, and there's a reason why they brought him here, and there's a reason why they actually blocked the Bears from interviewing him last year for John Fox. John Fox wanted to interview him as their offensive coordinator, and the Lions blocked it because they think that highly of Cooter, and they think that, I know for a fact Jim Caldwell thinks he's going to be an offensive coordinator going forward, and so he's a young guy. I think he's 31 or 32 and all these things, but he's a rising star on the offensive staff, and the Lions like him a lot. You don't see major changes to the offense in just a matter of a couple of weeks. I think what you've seen the past few weeks from the Lions offensively is more or less what you'll get against the Packers. If you do see differences offensively, I think you'll see less Amir Abdullah, mostly because of fumble issues and so forth. I think you'll see more of Joique Bell and Theo Riddick in the backfield. Those guys have been a little bit more productive and consistent and secure with the ball than Abdullah. I think you'll see more downfield passing. That's been an issue throughout the year, basically turning Calvin Johnson into a possession receiver, more or less. He's averaging the fewest number of yards per catch in his career at this point. And the Lions have not taken very many deep shots. I think part of that was schematic from Joe Lombardi. I think part of it also, though, was the protection issues with Stafford and just not being able to trust that he would get the time to throw a deep ball. But I think the Lions I think they're simplifying some of the blocking schemes up front. That's not something you'll necessarily see just watching the game on TV or something, but there is some simplification going on up there. And the Lions hope that'll give Stafford the time that he needs to find a guy like Calvin Johnson deep downfield, something we really haven't seen too much of this year.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. From what it looks like, Calvin Johnson is going to be playing this weekend. And like has been the case, he's been hobbled by various ailments this season, and he's barely inside the top 15 for receiving yards this year. Like you said, he's not really getting the deep ball. From an X's and O's standpoint, how is Calvin best used with the Detroit offense?
Well, he's best used downfield. He's still great down there. I've seen him make a couple of really nice catches this year. It's just been less frequent than in previous years. And, the Lions have, early in the year, it was a matter of they weren't going to him even when he had pretty good coverage looks. And then as the year progressed, the offensive line just got worse and worse. There's a reason three coaches got fired. And so I think that kind of deterred them from going deep as well. But the offensive line, more or less, it was bad against the Chiefs in their last game, but before that, you did see some marks of improvement. So I think the Lions will try to go back to Calvin deep. I think Cooter knows. He knows that. We talked to him today. We talked to him this week, and he said, the big thing I'm trying to do right now is to design a playbook in a way that takes advantage of the strengths of our players. Reading between the lines, that can really only mean one thing more than anything else, which is we're going to get the ball downfield. That's something the Lions haven't done. And when you have a big-armed quarterback like Stafford and you have one of the game's greatest receivers ever in Calvin Johnson, that's what you should be doing. And the Lions haven't been able to do it for a number of reasons. I do think their intent is to go back to that this week, and whether they can do it from a protection standpoint or whatever remains to be seen. But I do think you'll see more shots, at least more attempts down the field than we have in previous weeks.
Well, a lot of other people have been able to do it to the Packers recently, so maybe that Stafford and the Lions offense will be able to. But back to Calvin Johnson. I mean, he's 30 years old at this point, and from some of the reports I've seen this week, it looks like he could be on his way out of Detroit sooner rather than later. Obviously one of the most talented wide receivers probably ever, but I think his career is still a big sort of what if, like if he was in the right situation, it could have been a lot better. Like in your mind, what's the fan base's general feeling about this whole Calvin Johnson situation?
Yeah, I think it's there's a pretty good chance that he is wearing a different uniform next year. I don't know what that number is going to be, and no one does until there's a GM in place to make those kinds of decisions. But yeah, $24 million cap hit next year. At 17 plus each of the 3 years after that. Those are huge numbers for a guy who, again, basically has possession receiver type numbers this year. And I'm not saying he's a possession receiver in terms of skill. I still think Calvin can beat some guys, maybe not week in and week out like he used to when he was 26. But, crunch time, you need one deep ball or something. That's the guy to go into. He's still magnificent on the field. He's still really gifted. But again, that's a huge price tag to pay for a guy that you're not fully utilizing. And if the Lions, if the new GM comes in and says, "Hey, Stafford's not our quarterback," which could happen, then maybe you're talking about a total rebuild. And if you're talking about a total rebuild, are you really going to pay a guy $24 million to average 13 yards a catch? And those are the types of questions that the new GM will have to answer. And that's what puts, I think, Calvin's future in Detroit up in the air. I do think there's a lot of what-ifs to his career, but not really in terms of the numbers of the production. He's got a crazy number of historical marks. He's the fastest receiver ever to 11,000 yards. He's got the most yards in a regulation game, most yards in a season. I mean, he's done some pretty historic things, and I don't think people will forget that. The big what-if in Detroit is that, the winning, and he's never won a playoff game. He's only had, I think, 2 winning seasons in his career. He's gone through now, he's on his 3rd head coach. He's on his 3rd GM, his 4th offensive coordinator, and all that stuff. There just hasn't been the winning, and of course the comparisons now come with Barry Sanders, another legendary guy that people around here are always going to remember. You see the 20 jerseys everywhere, and Barry is, it's been more than 2 decades since he retired, and he's still a major celebrity around here and beloved figure. That's Calvin Johnson, but again, like Barry, without any kind of playoff or championship success. He's just kind of destined to losing, and that's been his legacy so far. And maybe now it's getting to the point where it's too late to change that. That's the crux. That's the intersection that his career is now at 30 years old.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Lions' defense. Aaron Rodgers has been under pretty much constant duress the past 2 weeks. If the Lions are going to continue that trend, Ziggy Ansah is going to need to pretty much carry the load. Is there any other way that the Lions are going to be able to keep the Packers in check?
I don't know. I mean, they have been the past couple of games. I will say, like, if you look at the stats, they've done okay against Aaron Rodgers. I mean, Aaron Rodgers gets everybody sooner or later, it seems like. But by comparison, I mean, I think the Lions have done an okay job against him. But this defense is not the same as it was last year. And if there's any chance of them even containing what the Packers are going to do and what Aaron Rodgers is going to do, it's going to depend on getting to the quarterback. Terrell Austin said that this week, the Lions defensive coordinator. They just need to put more pressure and get home on Rodgers if they want to have any hope of having defensive success, because their tackling, frankly, has not been very good. Their pass defense has not been very good. In 6 of their 8 games this year, they've allowed quarterbacks to complete 70% of their throws. So they just aren't the same defense that they were. Ziggy, as you mentioned, Ansah's a freak. He's so good physically. He just overwhelms. Like, I don't think he's even very good fundamentally, but he's just physically overwhelming guys. He's got 7 sacks, which I think is 4th in the league, if I'm not mistaken. And what I like is that previously in Ansah's career, he'd have these huge monster games with 2.5 sacks or something, a forced fumble, whatever. But then he wouldn't do anything for 2 or 3 weeks after that. He'd have these huge splash games and then kind of disappear for a while. Whereas this year, he's had a piece of a sack in all but 2 games. He's got a couple of forced fumbles in there. I'm serious, he made the play of the year for the Lions defensively, just in terms of how impressive it was when they were playing the Vikings. Adrian Peterson runs around the right side of the line, so away from Ansah, goes down the sideline for 75 yards. And who is it tackling Adrian Peterson at the 3-yard line, 75 yards downfield? Ziggy Ansah, the 6'5" defensive end. And it's just an impressive play in terms of a hustle and physical standpoint. The guy is really good. The Lions defense is not very good, but if anyone's going to cause Rodgers some problems, I think it's going to be Ziggy.
So he's certainly somebody that gives Lions fans, hope for the future and something to look forward to. But, I mean, is there anyone else on that defensive side of the ball? I know you mentioned guys like Ebron and Amir Abdullah on offense, but outside of Ansah, who else is there for Lions fans to be excited about defensively?
Well, I think Wilbur Quinn's a very good safety still. He's not young anymore, but I think he's 28 or 29. He's still got maybe 2 or 3 years, I think, to be a very good safety. But in terms of the young guys, Darius Slay's a very good cornerback. He's not elite, but he's in his 3rd year now, and he's improved. He was bad as a rookie. He was really improved last year. A very good cornerback. He was a top 20 cornerback according to Pro Football Focus and all those advanced metrics. This year, I think he's gotten a little bit better, but it's maybe not as dramatic as we would have expected. But he's extremely gifted physically. He can run. He's the fastest guy on the Lions team. He can run with just about anyone in the league, I think. He's got a little bit to go, I think, in terms of like the mental components of the game. But I think he has the potential to be a very good corner. And he's still pretty young, so he has a pretty bright future, I think, as long as he sticks with it.
Well, I want to come back to Jim Caldwell here for a second. I had to do a double take at the headline of a story you wrote at MLive this week. Here's your quote: "Where others see a dumpster fire, Jim Caldwell continues to see greatness." I mean, in your opinion, what does that say about Caldwell?
Well, he sees the best in his team, or at least he says he sees the best in his team, and I guess part of that is his job. But part of his personality is that he is just eminently positive. He's positive all the time. And when you're winning, that kind of thing works, and it's received well. When you're losing, it looks like maybe indifference or cluelessness. And I think it's just it's the other side of the coin to his personality. We saw it last year with the winning, and everyone loved it. They called him consistent. They called him, more disciplined because he wasn't maybe as emotional as Jim Schwartz was. Whereas this year, he's still the same guy, but they're losing, and so now it looks like cluelessness or hopelessness or whatever. And I don't know. Fans have a hard time with that quote, but what he means basically is that he sees the best in this franchise, and it's obviously been a terrible year. He was the first person to tell you that what's happened this year is unacceptable. But I think he's optimistic that pieces are in place, that it can be you don't need a total rebuild going forward, that there are pieces in place that this team could put together if, say, they had a better offensive line or something like that. I'm with you, and I'm with the fans a little bit. I thought that was a very curious thing to say, but I think from just in fairness to him and what he was trying to say, I think that's what he was going for. But they're 1-7, and they have the second worst point differential in the league. It's really hard to defend anything that this team has done to this point.
He's probably trying to save his job to a certain extent too. But
yeah, I think so.
But coming back to Sunday, the Detroit Lions, they haven't won in the state of Wisconsin since 1991. You see any chance of that happening this weekend?
Well, I mean, anything can happen, right? But,
right.
I would think it would be extremely, extremely unlikely because it hasn't happened with some pretty good teams, including last year. And they're not pretty good this year, so I think it's highly unlikely.
Well, Kyle, do you have a score prediction, kind of think how this game's going to play out? Do you see it being a high score for the Packers? Do you see the Lions, giving them a run for their money? What do you see happening on Sunday?
I think I predicted for our paper 28-17 Packers, and it's one of those things I think it won't even be that close, but maybe the Lions will pick up some garbage time points or something, which they've been very good at this year. That's the thing, man. Their offensive numbers are terrible. They're scoring the second fewest points in the game, and I think 3 of their touchdowns have come in total garbage time too. So they're actually worse than what their stats show. But yeah, no, I just think the Packers will have very little problems disposing of the Lions. They're not good defensively, so I think the Packers will be able to move the ball and sustain drives. And the Lions just can't compete offensively. They're turnover prone. They can't sustain drives. They do a lot of punting and a lot of giving away the ball. You can't do those things on the road, particularly at Lambeau. I just don't see very many ways the Lions are competitive in this game.
Well, as we've been saying, this is kind of exactly the game the Packers need right now. They need a game at home that maybe they can just beat up on someone after the past couple of weeks. And I'm kind of right there with you. I think it's going to be somewhere around 28-10. There's always that chance of getting some garbage time points, yeah. But I think this defense, needs to come out and prove something for the Packers. And so I'm hoping that's at least the case, that we get somewhere along the lines 28-10. Amanda, are you kind of thinking the same thing?
Yeah, I'm not sitting too far off. I think the Packers are going to be able to put up some big points. I think Aaron Rodgers is probably even more mad that he couldn't finish that comeback last week. So I see him putting up around 30, 32 points, and Lions will put up some, maybe around 13. But I think the Packers defense will hold their own at home. So, well, yeah, we'll see what happens on Sunday.
Yeah, my line of thinking is if the Chiefs suck, okay, and if the Chiefs can beat up on the Lions like they did, I think the Packers and Aaron Rodgers should have no problem doing it, particularly at Lambeau. Alex Smith is no Aaron Rodgers, and Alex Smith was pretty darn good last 2 weeks ago. And so I don't see these two teams even being in the same ballpark in terms of talent.
Well, at least this game's at America, so Got that going for us.
All right. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight on the Lions and what to expect on Sunday.
Anytime, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Kyle. We appreciate everyone for tuning into the Week 10 edition of Behind Enemy Lines. The Packers will host the Detroit Lions this Sunday. Once again, you can find our podcast on Twitter at EnemyLinesGB. I'm Chris Callaway, and you can find me on Twitter at CCallaway33.
And I'm Amanda Geffre. You can find me at Amanda R. Geffre. Thank you to our guest, Kyle Meinke, for joining us. You can find him on Twitter at KMeinke. Remember, check out all of our podcasts on PackersTalk.com and follow Behind Enemy Lines on Twitter at EnemyLinesGB. Until next time, go Pack, go!
This Green Bay Packers podcast is brought to you by Mayfield Sports Marketing, our official sports marketing agent for player appearances. To book a Packers player for your next event, go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances. Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Card.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.